Hey, thank you for waiting, but I'm back, so let's begin. Third POV. Izuku was currently sitting at the meet-up point with other pro heroes and police in the room with him, which Izuku had to admit made him a bit nervous about everything that was going on, since so many lives rested in his ability to pull this entire mission off without really anything major going wrong. No pressure. Yay, right, though. Izuku was glad that he would have some of the UA staff on the backup teams, though it still sucked that they were going to be a minimum of 8 minutes away from him and the entire island altogether, which didn't really help his nerves, but oh well. As the time passed, Izuku just continued to study the terrain and locations that were on the island to make sure he knew his way around the entire place so he wouldn't miss anything important. Izuku did notice that most, if not all, buildings were on one portion of the island where the docks were created at. This made Izuku think about where the villain base may be at, since he was sure they didn't want the citizens to know about it, since the villains were on the island for months before they took over, so they needed somewhere to hide. If they had all stayed in the town, then they would have been noticed, since even though the island gets people from the rest of Japan and the occasional foreigner, the police and heroes would have noticed non-native islanders staying for a long period of time. This meant that they had to have somewhere to stay away from the living portion of the island, which made Izuku think about checking the uninhabited portion of the island for the kidnapped children. Izuku looked at the time and noticed it was about time to get moving. He placed the map of the terrain and the notes he made so far in his pouch on his chest and checked his gear over one more time to make sure he had everything, since there was nothing he could get once he landed on the island. Izuku then moved towards the docks and saw the UA staff waiting for him as they told him to be careful and take his time, as a mistake could be lethal. Izuku nodded his head and said he would be careful and would be waiting for them when he called. After that, he walked down the rest of the docks where the police chief who was in charge of the police force for the mission was waiting, and he asked if Izuku needed anything before he left, which Izuku didn't have anything he needed. As such, Izuku got onto the sinkable boat he was going to be using to get close to the island and started to head off in the cover of the early morning, since the sun hadn't risen yet. It has been about 40 minutes since Izuku had set off in his small boat, and he could see the island of Tashima in the distance. As such, he cut the engine of the boat and just floated in the water, since the fog hadn't rolled in yet, as there was about 30 to 40 minutes before the typical time of the morning fog. As Izuku waited, he just mentally prepared himself for the jump into the mist once it rolled in, since he would need to sink the boat and ensure it started to sink before he entered the fog, or else the villains would find it, since the currents would push the boat to the island. The time quickly passed and the fog was rolling in like normal, and Izuku started the engine and slowly moved in so he wasn't too close, and right as he entered the fog he killed the engine and tore a large hole on the bottom of the boat, which started to flood with water that had already met the top of his shoes as Izuku entered the mist. That filled faster than I thought it would, Izuku thought, but he put it out of his mind as he maneuvered as part of the mist and landed on the edge of the island. As Izuku came out of the mist, he sent an alert on his communications device that he had arrived and got a confirmation that the fishing boats were in position, as well as they acted like they were fishing, though they would move around a bit over the next hours until they would be forced to leave later in the day to not arouse suspicions. This meant if Izuku couldn't solve everything in one day, then he would need to sleep on the island without being found, which was risky. After sending his alert, Izuku started to go back into the mist and decided to check on the town area first to see what was going on there. Looking over the town, Izuku could say it wasn't a good situation overall, since he could tell who was a part of the villain group a bit easy inside the town, since they walked with pride and confidence in their step, while the actual citizens backed away in fear or moved to the other side of the roads to avoid blocking the villains' paths. Izuku also had to sit there and watch the citizens cower in fear, as the police officers nearby could only stand by and clench their fists and turn their heads in shame. I need to finish this as soon as I can, but I need to find their base of operations, Izuku thought as he slipped back into the mist and started to search the entire town, but found nothing that would point him towards their operations being based in the town itself as he thought. As such, Izuku moved out of the town and headed up the mountain, which resulted in Izuku indeed finishing the base of operations for the villains after about 4 hours of searching the entire mountain. This meant there was only about 1 hour of normal mist lingering around the island left, which was a tight squeeze in getting much done without having to use his own quirk to keep the mist around. In all honesty, Izuku wondered how the villains made the base of operations that he found inside the mountain area of the island, since it would have been noticed by someone that such a thing was being built, as Izuku used the mist that was lingering into the building since the main doors were open. Izuku realized why no one noticed them setting this place up. It was literally an emergency shelter that the island had built in the event of a large earthquake, tsunami, or something else that would have been a threat to the island. Smart of them to take this over. Most people wouldn't come to look at it much, since it was only for emergencies, Izuku thought as he slowly made his way through the place and used his mist to transport himself into the vent system, since it was large for him to crawl through. While Izuku was exploring the villain operations, he used his device that he was given to take pictures of the villains and anything he found interesting. Though He came to a stop at one vent as he saw children being trained in a room that had been transformed into training grounds. Izuku watched as the children were beaten when they made mistakes and told to do it better as the children had to fight each other and the loser was beaten. Sadly, effective way to motivate them to fight to avoid getting beaten. Can't wait to take these bastards out, Izuku thought. Looking throughout the room from what he could see he found around 40 children and Izuku wondered if that was all of the children they had or if there was more. "Oi, get your ass up here, brat," one villain yelled and a kid with purple hair that looked around Izuku age stumbled up. "Listen, this is the newest recruit we obtained. You will all show him the ropes and get him to adhere to the rules or else the punishments will be like the normal ones. Do you brats understand?" The man yelled out and all of the children except the new one yelled out, "Yes, sir." The man smacked the purple-haired kid on the head and asked him in a stronger tone if he understood and the kid repeated the "yes, sir" words. "Good. You 40 are all that remains of the 160 children we had obtained for our employer. He wants trained soldiers for his apprentice, so I got hired to create well-behaved and well-trained men for this and I refuse to look back in front of that man. Any disobedience will be met with death because I only need a minimum of 20 of you to meet his needs, but the more I provide, the higher the pay. So unless you want to die, then you will be good little puppets, so get to training. And if I come back and find anyone slacking off, then I will kill them," said the man as he walked out of the room and left. Izuku noticed as he left that there was a few guards out of the room. "I will need to take them out, but I need to know if the man's words are true on that these are the only children left," Izuku thought as he decided to quickly scout the rest of the base out. About an hour passed and Izuku made it back to the room where the children had been training. The entire mist of the island had already departed by now and Izuku could no longer risk making mist without alerting the villains since it would seem unnatural from that point forward, but Izuku did indeed confirm that only the 40 children in the training room were the last ones alive since Izuku had found the other children, or rather the location of the other children. Izuku had located one of the main villains' offices, which included a map that showed a mass grave site that Izuku went and scouted out before the mist left the island. Izuku knew these villains would not hesitate to kill all of the innocent people on the island, and he had sent an image of the grave and a warning to the command station back on mainland Japan. Izuku informed them that only 40 children remained and that he would return to see if they were still in the training room. If they were, then Izuku would start his side of the operation and start taking out the villains as best as he could without alerting anyone in the base. Izuku also said he would be calling for the backup to come to the island the moment he has the children secured to one room, since there was only one way to the training room where they were. The reason to go this route was if Izuku could knock out all villains in the base, then he could keep the children safe while the backup attacks the villains in the town. Overall, there were only about 80 villains in the town while the rest remained in the base itself, which Izuku felt confident in stopping the villains from getting past him while the backup secures the town. This would mean the citizens couldn't be used as hostages, nor could the children be used. Also, the backup team would be able to come to reinforce Izuku once they cleared the town as well, since they would likely make faster work of the villains in the town. As Izuku made his way to the vent, he looked in and saw the leader from what information he gathered watching the children train. "You all are getting better, but it's time to move the training up a stage. Moving forward, you will now be learning how to wield guns, but don't bother trying to kill us since you are only being given paint bullets that show where you hit on a target, so they can't kill us, though I bet it could, you brats," said the man with a chuckle as all of them fell into line and waited for the man to bring their tools out. The man ordered his 2 men in the room to start the next stage of training while he went to do some other work. As such, once he left and the doors open, he knew the 2 men inside were actually the ones that had guarded the door, which worked for Izuku. Izuku used his mist to enter the room, and right as he came out of it, he turned the float quirk on so he wouldn't drop down yet. Right as both men finished giving the children the weapons and told them to shot at the targets on the other side of the room, Izuku used the sounds of the gunshots to his advantage as he dropped down and turned one for all on itself at 20%. Right as the 2 noticed him, it was already too late, as Izuku kicked them both hard enough that they blacked out due to their brains hitting their skulls, which caused them to black out. Indeed, they are overall weaker, but it's their numbers that allowed them to do what they needed. Though, based on what I heard, the man guy is a bit more powerful, Izuku thought as he looked at all of the children who were staring at him. "Keep firing to hide what has happened, okay? I promise to get you all out of here as soon as possible," Izuku said, and some nodded their heads as they came out of their shock and started shooting to create noise. Izuku then grabbed some rope from the room's supplies to tie them up, though he did decide to duct tape their mouths shut so they couldn't scream for help in the event that they woke up before he was done with the base. Izuku then went to the door and it opened as Izuku looked into the hallway before stepping back in. This room is the furthest in the base and only had one hallway leading here from what I saw of the blueprints in the main guy's office, Izuku thought as he looked at the photo he took of the blueprints and studied them again and nodded his head slowly. Izuku then told them all to stop shooting. "Okay, My hero name is Raiden and I was sent here to save you all since the government discovered that the villains had taken this island over. I've already knocked those 2 guys out, but I need to deal with all of the other villains in this base that will make their way here once they discover this. Once I defeat them all, I can lead you all out of the base and away from here. Do you understand? Izuku asked, and they all nodded their heads, though the purple-haired kid raised his hand and Izuku pointed at him. Is there not other heroes for this outside of you? This is a sizable villain group after all, said the kid, and Izuku asked for his name, which he said was Hitoshi Shinso. Izuku nodded his head and explained why it was only him. As it stands, I am the only hero on the island due to how hard it is to get here without the villains knowing, since they control the entire thing. There are police and pro heroes hiding out at sea on boats waiting for me to call them, which I will be doing in a moment. Though while they take the town back, I will be fighting the remaining villains here until they arrive. Again, there is only one way to this room and they will have to get through me, so I need you all to stay here as well as knock those 2 out if they wake up. Any other questions? Izuku asked, and none of them had any and told them to be careful. Izuku then made contact with the command station back on the coast. Send the backup. I've secured the living children and will be starting my work on all remaining villains in the base, Izuku said, and the order was confirmed as he was told it would be about 8 minutes for the police and heroes to land on the island. Izuku then cut the communications and exited the room as he looked into it and saw no one still. As he left, he was careful to not cause much sound, but slowly he summoned mist that traveled on the ground slowly in front of him in the event the alarms went off. This way he could be quicker in flooding the hallways with his mist to use it to teleport behind villains and quickly land the knockout blows. After arriving in the first room, Izuku opened it to find it had 5 villains whose backs were turned to him as they were watching a TV with a game show on it. Seems they are on break, Izuku thought, as the room was a small room that looks converted into a break room, but horribly done. Izuku pulled out his sleeping darts and threw one into each of their necks as he quickly grabbed their heads with black whips to stop them from shouting out before the drugs took effect. After a few moments, Izuku dropped them and then headed towards the next room, where he kept repeating this process until halfway through the base he got caught by a villain who was staring at him in the middle of the hallway. Izuku turned OFA up to his limit of 70% and darted off as the floor tore up due to the force, but right as Izuku did it, the man shouted for help. Izuku punched the man as he dropped the power to 30%, which sent the man into the wall, but again it was too late as more people had walked out due to the man's quick shout, which sent the alarms off. Izuku de-iced to go all or nothing as he flooded the entire base with mist as he quickly made his way between people and wasn't aiming to just purely knock them out but to disable them as short-term threats, since Izuku was using his kodachi to cut ligaments in the back of people's legs, which made them fall down. The wounds wouldn't kill them, nor would it leave them unable to walk in the future, but for now they wouldn't be able to move since the ligament was cleanly cut. Izuku turned his comm link on for any pro hero nearby and asked if anyone was on the island yet that could hear him. After a few seconds, he got a reply. This is Eraserhead. What is your situation, Raiden? Eraserhead asked, and Izuku was glad to hear his voice. The villains know I am present in the base, though I cleared about half of them before the alarm went off. I am currently engaged in a full-scale battle inside the base as I've flooded it with my mist. What is the situation in the town? Izuku asked, and Eraserhead told him they were about finished in the town, so they would be coming in about 10 minutes due to the distance of the base from the town. Izuku confirmed as he kept dealing with the villains that came at him, though the main villain himself showed up and told his men to back off as he looked at Izuku. You have no idea who you are messing with. You should be afraid of my employer, since he could turn you into a shivering mess from how powerful he is, so give up now so I can just kill you instead of him coming after you for this mess, said the man, which made Izuku roll his eyes since that sounded like a typical villain threat. The man seemed offended but told Izuku it was his funeral then to oppose his employer. The main villain activated his quirk, which turned out to be a form of metal-based control as he started to make the metal bend as they turned into sharp poles which got blasted off towards Izuku, who started to dodge them, though they kept coming, which forced Izuku to turn into mist since it was a somewhat tight hallway with all of the poles coming at him. I see how you got on this island. Interesting. I think my employer would enjoy knowing of that quirk, said the villain with a smirk, but Izuku didn't care as he charged forward as he flooded the hallway with more mist and appeared in the group of villains behind the main guy and took more of them out, which enraged him. Don't ignore me, he yelled out as Izuku just kept defeating his men while keeping an eye out to make sure no one went towards the children. More time passed when Izuku decided to quickly change targets and went straight for the main guy, which threw the guy off balance since he had been chasing Izuku around the hallway the entire time trying to stop Izuku from destroying his men. This resulted in a 40% punch to the man's stomach, which sent him right into his own men, knocking a few of them out as well as the man guy, though Izuku was sure the man had a lot of broken bones, though Izuku couldn't find it himself to care about someone that slaughtered so many children. Izuku continued to make work of the remaining villains that kept coming his way as the hallway was by this point filled with bodies on the floor. The hallway also had a heavy scent of blood, puke, and other bodily fluids from Izuku beating the hell out of the villains since he did put a bit more power than fully needed in each hit. Though it all came to an end when Eraserhead came flying in as he kicked a guy's head into the floor. Izuku was a bit stunned since Eraserhead had somehow jumped over all of the villains, which in Izuku's view was pretty damn cool in Izuku's view. I take it the town is secured, Izuku asked, and Eraserhead nodded his head and informed Izuku of the situation. Indeed, we left Ectoplasm and a couple of pro heroes guarding the town. Everyone else came here since all of the remaining villains are here, Eraserhead said as they could hear the fighting from the other side of the villain group that had been fighting Izuku. Well, this was quite interesting for a first solo mission turned into a team mission, Izuku said with a smirk on his face as they continued to work on the remaining villains. After a bit longer they met in the middle of all of the bodies with the other pro heroes. Okay, Eraserhead want to join me with the children? Izuku asked, and the man nodded his head as they left the villains to everyone else to deal with and clean up. God, Chaos Gremlin, did they shit themselves facing you? Aizawa asked as he smelt the horrible smell in the hallway as they walked towards the room the children were in. Izuku rubbed his neck and shrugged. I guess so, Izuku said, not wanting to mention the fact that he likely forced them to dedicate themselves due to the large hits to their stomachs and interests which likely helped the villains in that matter. Soon they made it to the training room and opened the door to be greeted with all of the children pointing guns at them, which shocked Eraserhead, whose eyes went wide. Oh, calm down, they only have paint bullets, Izuku said, which calmed Eraserhead down. Okay children, all of the villains have been taken care of and you are free. We will work on getting you all out of here once the villains are all dragged out by the police, so just sit tight a bit longer, but the situation is over, Izuku said with a clenched fist in front of him, which made the children smile a bit as the younger ones came up to him and asked him questions about himself. Izuku did his best in answering questions and keeping the children calm as a few minutes later a few officers walked in and started to question the students for their names so they could get a hold of their family. Izuku did notice one kid who turned out to be Hitoshi Shinso was a bit away from the group. As such, Izuku moved over to him and checked to see if he was okay. Hey, are you okay? Izuku asked as he leaned down as Shinso was sitting on the floor. Yeah, just wondering what happens now for me, Shinso said, and Izuku asked what he meant. Turns out Hitoshi Shinso was a child that was not actually kidnapped but instead sold by his foster parents to this villain group. Okay, they were 1, wrong to do that. 2, you are not a villain, so don't believe their bullshit. I've had a pro hero sadly villainous me when I was younger since they wanted something out of me back then and turned my own mother against me sadly. That forced me to run away and live on my own before I got adopted by a few pro heroes who helped me out. Third, let's see what we can do about your situation, Izuku said, which stunned Shinso as he watched Raiden call out to Eraserhead and walk over to the man, though he couldn't hear what they were talking about but assumed it was about what he had just told Raiden. So, Aizawa, I know Hisashi wants a child, and though you adopted me, I don't exactly fill the child's need of his since I am an independent kid who was forced to grow up years ahead of everyone else. As such, want to adopt Hitoshi Shinso over there, who was sold to this villain group by his foster parents. By the way, his quirk is brainwashing and he wants to be a pro hero, which would be amazing to be taught by you as well, Izuku said with a grin on his face, and Aizawa just looked done with Izuku. Fine, I'll call my husband and see if he would like to foster the kid before we move on to the Who adoption to make sure the kid will be okay with us, Aizawa said with a roll of his eyes, but Izuku could tell there was a small smile under the scarf as well, since Aizawa always did want a kid to take care of with present Mike, which Izuku couldn't really ever feel much to his own displeasure. It isn't like Izuku doesn't see them as parents, but Izuku raised himself with the help of the past users in that forest for so long that it would be impossible to force himself to settle down as they would need. It's why he was glad Nezu took him to his own, which was in a forest, which made him feel comfortable, and Nezu never treated Izuku like a normal child, but instead he treated him like a grown adult who had handled himself for so many damn years that wouldn't want to be downgraded in their independence. After waiting a bit, Aizawa came back and said they would foster the kid. As such, Izuku took Aizawa Aka Eraserhead to Hitoshi Shinso and smirked. Congratulations, you are being fostered by Eraserhead here and his husband present Mike, Izuku said as he waved his hand and walked away from them so they could get to know each other better. Izuku was glad he could help Hitoshi out in finding a safe place to live his life, since that was always an important thing in Izuku's mind for children, since he didn't want people to keep going through what he did within Midoriya or having to raise themselves as he did in that forest. Though, Izuku was glad that he had everyone at UA as a family now. Third POV. It's been a few weeks since the raid on Toshima Island, and Izuku could say that the island was returning to its normal operations overall. It was decided by the government to add a few extra pro heroes to the island with normal routine checkups on the island and all other islands that belong to Japan as well, to ensure another event like this didn't happen as easily. When Izuku did return to UA after the mission, he was praised by All Might for completing the mission by himself for so long, but also scolded him for taking such a mission without telling him, since it was indeed his first actual mission. All Might also would glare at Nezu every so often for allowing the mission without informing Yagi, but Nezu easily withstood the half-hearted glare since All Might was more proud of Izuku completing the mission than being assigned it. Though in other news, Izuku has stopped by Eraserhead's and Present Mike's home to see how Hitoshi Shinso had been doing. One afternoon when Shinso had gotten back from school, Izuku was already in the apartment waiting in his hero outfit as he sat on the couch and Shinso was just staring at him. "Yo," Izuku said as he did a slight wave and then drank the coffee. Shinso continued to stare at him but then moved into the kitchen to get some coffee as well before he sat down on the couch and asked what Raiden was doing at his foster parents' home. "Oh, I came around to snoop for any blackmail to use on Eraser. Always need some form of dirt on others," Izuku said with a grin on his face while the rest was hidden by his hood. Shinso sat there looking at Izuku with a deadpan expression before he spoke. "I don't know if I should be concerned that you want to blackmail my foster parents or scared that a stranger is in my foster parents' home without them knowing," Shinso said, which made Izuku laugh. "Oh, yeah, you wouldn't know since I stay at my other place all of the time since I have a hard to living around others," Izuku muttered lowly, but Shinso caught it and raised an eyebrow as he asked him what he didn't know. "Ah. Well, I actually got a key to this place since Aizawa has partial custody of me. I don't live here though since my situation was a bit unique that I can't feel comfortable living in a highly populated area so easily. It's part of the reason I knew they would most likely take you in since I would never be able to fill the void of them wanting to raise and care for a child since I am too far independent due to the situation I found myself in my childhood. As such, I live with Principal Nezu of UA in his forest home, which is more comfortable for me than in more populated areas," Izuku explained as Shinso sat there stunned to learn that the person that saved him with the other pro-heroes was adopted and was partially under the custody of his new foster parents. "Anyway, in reality, I am here waiting for Eraser to get back since we have a drug bust to go do when he gets off from UA," Izuku said, and that snapped Shinso out of his thoughts as he nodded his head. As Shinso started to work on his schoolwork, Izuku decided to ask him if he was doing any training for UA since he wanted to be a hero student. Shinso paused and said he was doing some physical training via running, but he didn't know really what to do since he knew his mental quirk wouldn't help much. Izuku nodded his head and knew from what the other users provided him based on All Might's memories was that the UA entrance exam was a robot-based one. As such, Izuku had dug around UA a bit using his quirk and found the information on the exam, which turns out the robots had shut off buttons. Izuku decided to give his soon-to-be adoptive brother, in a way due to Aizawa's partial custody over Izuku, a hint about the entrance exam. "You should ask Eraserhead to train you for the entrance exam to increase your odds at passing, but I will give you a hint at the exams. It's filled with robots, but those robots do have shut-off buttons if you can find them," Izuku said with a smirk as Shinso's head snapped up to him. Shinso asked him why he would tell him how to pass the exam since UA would want its current students to keep quiet about it to the public. Izuku shrugged as he spoke. "I think your quirk would be amazing for heroics, and the exam is biased, so a hero's job is to help correct unfairness. I just happen to be doing it by giving you some tips for the exam and how to prepare. How you use that is completely up to you, so if you pass it will still be in your own power since you will have to be able to move fast enough and work hard enough to pass," Izuku said as he stood up as Izuku heard the door move. A few seconds later, Eraserhead and Present Mike were standing in the living room looking at their foster child being in the same room as the adoptive child of Eraser's. "Problem child, why are you here? Not that I don't like you being here, but normally you just go to Nezu's home after you're done with your day unless you have other things to do," Eraserhead asked as he sat his UA stuff down. Izuku nodded his head and looked at the clock. Then he looked at Eraserhead. "It seems you forgot about the drug bust we are going on in an hour," Izuku asked with a wave to the clock as Eraserhead pulled his phone out and then cursed. "Yeah, I forgot. Thanks for reminding me," Eraserhead said as he started to prepare for going on heroic work. After about 10 minutes, the man came back as he was ready to get to work. Eraserhead and Izuku said their goodbyes and headed off to go do their drug bust. As they were doing the drug bust, Izuku decided to bring up the topic of if Eraser was starting to train Shinso since there isn't that long left before UA starts. "So, you going to start training the kid?" Izuku asked, and Aizawa rolled his eyes. "You are the same age as him and you call him a kid?" Aizawa asked, and Izuku shrugged as he knocked two villains back. "Not my fault, I have the mentality and mind of an adult. That is the fault of one Sir Night-Eye," Izuku said as he jumped over an attack from one villain as they made their way deeper into the base of the villains, with police slowly making their way behind them as they cuffed all of the villains that got knocked out. "Yeah, still it's weird. I also will train him likely starting next week. Though with his quirk it will be hard for him to pass the exam regardless due to the limited physical training we will get done in the short period of time," Aizawa said as he threw a villain into the air with his scarf and kicked the guy as he came down in front of him. Izuku just shrugged as he didn't want to let Eraserhead know that he had given the kid a hint about the exam itself, though he was sure his adoptive father Nezu knew somehow that Izuku had, since that man knew everything. Soon the raid was over as they had cleared all of the villains. Izuku sat on a box in the final room and looked around him. Well, they were rather easier than the villains I fought on the island, Izuku muttered, and Aizawa just rolled his eyes. Those villains were indeed a bit stronger than these random thugs for this drug ring, but it also is a lower ranked ring as well, Aizawa said, which made Izuku nod his head. Well, I'm going to go home and finish the reports for all of this. Nezu is having me start doing patrols during the daytime since he wants me to start establishing a more known presence, Izuku said, and Eraserhead nodded his head. Soon they wrapped everything up and went their separate ways. As Aizawa arrived in the house, Shinso called out to him. Yes, Aizawa asked as he could see Shinso was nervous a bit. I was wondering if you could train me for UAS entrance exam. I know my quirk will not give me an advantage with the fact that the exam is robot-based, but I would at least still try my hardest, Shinso said, and Aizawa nodded his head as he said he would be glad to help him train. Aizawa did say that even if he failed, there was still a way to get into the hero course via the sports festival, which Shinso was glad about. While that was going on, Izuku had arrived back at his home with Nezu in UAS Forest. Welcome back, Nezu said as he was working on his computer in the living room. Izuku nodded his head as he went up to his room to change. After coming back down, he sat down across from Nezu with some tea in his hands. So as of recent, you have finished your teaching certificate, which is good, and you are nearly done with your first year of college level work. This leaves us about 3 months before the entrance exam and then the following 2 months after that. What are you wanting to do with that time to best use it? Nezu asked Izuku, since their plans were a bit ahead of schedule. Izuku had ended up making quicker work of his teaching certificate and college-level work than he predicted, which has left more time to get things done. Though, I think I will start my second-year college work since I would like to have a college degree sooner instead of later, but all other time I think I will put it into just heroic work since I want to rub my progress and abilities into Sir Night-Eye's face, since sooner or later he will get wind of who I am, Izuku said as he wanted to get a bit petty with that man. Nezu nodded his head and agreed it would be a good approach to everything. As such, Nezu told Izuku he had set up a social media page for him already, which was all under his hero name, Raiden. Izuku was shocked to see he already had some followers already. They are from the island mission, it seems, since they all live on that island. They most likely had searched up your hero name and had been digging to the point they found it, since I had made these social media accounts the moment you had the provisional license, since we need to build you a fan base online. You are going to be a mix between Daylight and an underground pro hero who hides while doing work but won't shy away from the camera if he gets seen on it, which the social media platform will help build up your fanbase since you won't constantly be in the daylight. Even those you save at night might want to find you online, which will provide them a way which will also let people know you do work at night and during the day as well, Nezu explained, and Izuku could only agree with the entire statement that his adoptive father had given him. Izuku did enjoy the profile picture a bit, which was a picture of him in his suit facing a camera, which Izuku wondered where the hell it got taken at, but wasn't going to question his father. You just need to be yourself on social media, and it will slowly grow with your success, Nezu said, which earned a nod of the head from Izuku. Izuku could already see some posts from the islanders that he helped save, and he decided to reply to some of them. Most of them were just thanking him for saving the island, while others asked what some of his hobbies or other things that he did were. Izuku replied to what he felt comfortable with without giving away too much personal information, since again he was still hiding from Sir Night-Eye currently. After about an hour of doing that, he decided it was time to just be lazy for the day since he had done enough work for one day, so he just went to bed a bit earlier so he could go train since he had no patrol or cases to work on for the next few days. Izuku wanted to push his control even more since he was now sitting at 75% and would like to get to 80% before UAS entrance exams. At the rate I'm going, I should hopefully get to 100% before the end of the semester, which would be nice, Izuku thought as he started to drift away into his sleep. With that, guys, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you want to support the channel, and see you soon.